consumer. You will not be restricted, thanks for the advertising, but you will not be restricted by your device. You'll be able to stream content, be it a game, be it a movie, or be it both, or an animation, or both on any device, through a browser or technology something like that. That's going to be unbelievable.
So for me, the most exciting thing that I've kind of seen starting to emerge is new interfaces, new ways to control games and computers. I mean, the camera tracking and touch and all these things are starting to work really well. I mean, it's taken a long time, but they're starting to work really well. And I think you're going to see increasingly more and more ways to control your computer, other than keyboard and mouse and standard controllers. And I think that's going to be really exciting because what it's going to do is open up more complicated forms of gaming to a broader audience, and it's going to sort of transcend. You're going to get away from controllers and devices, and people will just be interacting with your content without that stuff in the way. And I think that's going to have a huge impact on the kind of games we can make.
So we were remarking earlier that I have a memory of things that only happened in like the last 10 days or so. Like if I write 5 or 10 stories a day, I just can't remember anything that happened last month anymore. But one of those things that happened in the last 10 days was very interesting. It was Valve talking about the Steam OS and Steam machines now, as of yesterday. So what do you guys think of the idea that a whole new game ecosystem sort of can come out of the blue, challenge the consoles, the traditional consoles, and establish something that is for the gamers?
Launching a new platform is difficult. It requires both understanding what users want, creating content to feed the user consumption, distribution, whether retail or online.
I guess you could argue that Valve has that content already.
Yeah,
it's got the Steam library.
But it's a different problem when you create and try and sell hardware. So I think it's interesting.
Or take that hardware to a new place like the TV set, right?
Well, maybe we'll ask the audience. If you raise your hands, we can't actually see it because the lights are in place here, but how many people believe in the Steam box or the Steam console? Raise your hands if you believe. It's about
a third, maybe.
How many don't believe? Leave us hands. No opinion? Is everyone else?
I think it's interesting. I think
you can't really talk about that evil Microsoft.
I have great respect for Valve. I was still new, so I got the new back. I have great respect for Valve. I think my previous company, ABB, really was a big part of ABB's rejuvenation was Steam. We were top 5 games in Steam for nearly 18 months on a row. They definitely have the audience. I think what is going to be interesting is the design and the understanding of how much time do people spend on a single screen interacting with it. Now if you go home today, if you have kids, I have a 6-year-old, they're interacting with content on multiple devices. They're not sitting in front of the TV as it was probably 10 years ago. So they have their iPad, they have the DS, they have the console, they have the big screen experience, and they have a PC or laptop to go to. So focusing a product on one screen, to me, is kind of a risky strategy, but I hope it works, and there's another distribution point for game developers to make some money.
Valve has done just that. They've opened up a tremendous distribution channel with Steam, right, which has helped lots of people in the PC space. I think the challenge, and you're right, Mike, that it's hard to start launching a new console. The challenge, especially in the living room, is going to be, my cable box works. I just plug it in, I get the channels, I move it around, right? If you try to move that beyond the hardcore gamer, I have no belief that my wife could make a Steam box work at all, right? And it's hard enough trying to make TiVo work, right? And then remember what content you have in what place. And so it's very challenging. It's an amazing proposition, which is I can play those great PC games that I like on the screen that I used to only be able to play console games on. So I like that concept, especially as a developer, because the experiences of most of what Ubisoft does works great on a big screen. But are we going to, we're in the same place with that. With other technologies, it's like, okay, well, we can't make an Assassin's Creed for that for launch day yet, because there's not the volume there. How well are they going to do licensing that technology out to third-party vendors? You know, or is that going to happen? Or what's the penetration going to be like quickly? It's as much of a business as it is an ease of access question.
Which platform is going to win?
I think the consumer is going to win.
I agree.
I think the consumer is going to win. The platform is just going to be another distribution point. The end of the day, consumer and the way the consumer interacts with entertainment and how long does he interact with a specific franchise is what's going to happen. There is, the platform at the end of the day is just another medium to deliver content.
I'll answer this a little differently. We already know that Xbox and PlayStation has pre-sold a lot of orders. In many cases, they're sold out. So things will be great for this year. The question is, for how long will these platforms sell? And I would say, piece of advice to Microsoft and Sony, they can take it for what it is. They better crank out these PlayStations and Xboxes as quickly as possible and have as many units available as possible, because I think the window by which they'll be able to sell is going to get shorter and shorter and shorter over time. Every platform. Phones come out once a year, once every 6 months. I don't think they're going to have years to sell Xboxes and PlayStations, or at least this current generation of Xbox and PlayStation.
So the most accessible platform usually wins. So what accessible means in this case is cheap and easy to use and lots of content. And so to me, that's going to be tablets.
Yeah, I'm going to fall back on the lots of content, because I think content can kill or make completely a platform. We can all cite excellent technology that never went anywhere because of a lack of content. And by the same token, we can look at, essentially repackaged technology, the Wii, and see how well it did because of the content that was there.
Actually, to that point, let's look at advice like this. So we all go on the App Store or the Google Play App Store. How many of you can name an app that's below the top 25 or 50 right now?
That we didn't make?
That you didn't make. Not many people. This is another retail point of presence. It's tough for folks to look beyond top 10, top 20, top 25. This is another store shelf. This is top part of the store versus bottom part of the store at your local Safeway. And so it's great that there's a lot of content being created, but only so much can get consumed, and only so much will be brought to the attention of consumers.
So free-to-play has been mentioned a few times as almost a kind of salvation for folks who are having a hard time in the traditional space or making the transition from physical to digital. But we've gone through a few generations of learning now on it, and I wonder what some of the mistakes have been in free-to-play. In fact, I think we're still seeing some of the mistakes today, right? Like Plants vs. Zombies 2 had 25 million downloads, but it sounds like they're not monetizing that well, and that you may not see them showing up very high in the top grossing rankings that would correlate with the 25 million downloads. So it still seems like it's not a cure-all, it's not a salvation. What have we learned?
Well, from our standpoint, because we have plenty of examples of learning along the way, is that it's not just about only making a good game, because we can make a great game, and if it's to your point, if monetization hasn't been designed in well from the beginning, the game won't monetize. Or if we've made a mistake and made the game very monetizing, but not that exciting to play, people will come and try it, and they won't stay. And if we happen to hook both of those together, a well-monetizing game with a good game design that is not well set for user acquisition, that too is it will mess up the entire mix. So it's much harder, I think, for at least for our designers now to think about all three of those aspects as they're designing a game. And the ones where we've seen the most success are the ones that started off thinking of all those areas to begin with, not something that's many stages down the path where it's a conversion.
So I've done a bunch of different business models at this point, and for me, free-to-play, it's not a catch-all. I mean, I think it only works for some games and some audiences. For example, I think if you're doing a game for kids, that's a tough road. Getting them to pony up microtransactions is very hard. They don't have their own credit cards, so they're going back to mom every time they want to buy something. And so you need to be friends with the parents if you want to make a game for kids. And microtransaction free-to-play is not the best way to do it. I think there are other examples of that. Teenage girls are also a tough free-to-play audience. You're better off going with more B2B type models. So I think free-to-play is great, and it allows you to have scalable revenue and take advantage of all the people who are willing to pay a great deal of money for your game. But it's not for everything, and I think we just need to have it as a tool in our toolbox and not assume that everything has to be free-to-play. I think that's a mistake.
Focusing on the hardcore side of that audience, if I ask the question, name the top 10 free-to-play MMOs, and most consumers will start with League of Legends, World of Tanks, and then you slowly start saying, maybe Lotro, it wasn't really free-to-play, but and then you kind of stop at 4 and 5 and things start blanking out. But if I said, name the top 10 subscription, not top 10 retail, it's far easier to remember. So free-to-play has a much lower success rate compared to traditional. And it's not fair to assume that you can take any IP and just convert it into launch as free-to-play. When we acquired, my previous company, we acquired APB out of bankruptcy from Real Time Worlds. They had, I think, probably spent upwards of $75 million, $80 million building APB. It was subscription, retail plus subscription model. It was really triple A. And when we were acquiring the company, we had seen a lot of these investor decks on it. And I remember this one slide, the first slide of the investor deck, with a big NBA style graph, and it had GTA, WoW, and then way up there was APB. It didn't do that. When we acquired it, this public knowledge, I think we paid 1.5 million pounds or something to acquire the game. We took an $80 million IP and we only paid 1.5. And then we spent 18 months because we could afford to, converting it into free-to-play. And that's when the game made sense. Because revenue we were driving off, it made sense only if it was $1.5 million. So if you're going to build an $80 million IP without a tested model, please do not do it. It's a very, very different model. League of Legends did not spend $80 million building the game. World of Tanks did not spend $80 million building the game. So be very, very careful to say, you know what, it's a good buzzword, it works, then you spend $100 million, take a game, make it free to play, because there'll be a lot of examples out there which haven't done.
So, similar comments to Mike, free-to-play doesn't work for everything. Certainly for children's-oriented games and apps, I would steer more toward the premium download side. The gap between the child and the parent and the game or the app is quite high. I will say this, EA really had 3 top games on the charts, on mobile charts in recent times with Madden and FIFA coming out, a few more now. But the top performing game up until Madden and FIFA was Simpsons Tapped Out. It's a company that we bought in a remote part of Canada, Prince Edward Island. And the game is over a year and a half old, yet it performs better from a monetization standpoint. It's higher up in terms of grosses more than Sims Free Play and Real Racing than Plants vs. Zombies. May not have as much usage, but it was designed from the ground up to be a free-to-play game. And I credit the creative team at Byte Games for doing this. They had worked with another game before called Trade Nation, published by Z2 Live. And we found this team, and we asked them to do Simpsons for us. And the creative designers there designed this game from the ground up to both engage and monetize. They understood how to make a high-quality game. Other games, people would argue why they succeed or they don't succeed. I do think it's games that don't come with that mentality. They go making a fun game that's graphically intensive, that looks good, that should be fun, but if they don't think about how people will spend money, what's the pinch, what's the reason why I feel the pressure, it's, I almost won, let me just put an extra $1 here now, or on Candy Crush. I've cleared up all the levels, I can just now open the next one. I don't want to wait to ask my friends to give me the permission or the ability, the ticket to go up. Get you right at that point to spend some money. The greatest companies in mobile gaming understand how to acquire, how to engage, and how to monetize. Without these 3 aspects, with only one or with only 2 of those aspects, you're not likely to make one of the top games out there.
Do we have any audience questions at this point? There's one right there, right?
So you guys have been kind of talking about whether it was the Revenge of AAA, whether it just that question with regard to Grand Theft Auto, PvP, user-created content. This is all, in my opinion, dancing around the larger issue of designing for long tail versus designing for kind of traditional, the AAA, the Grand Theft Auto. If you're designing for long tail, you are expecting to make, the overwhelming majority of your revenue 9 months down the road, accumulation. Even with regard to if you don't know apps in the top 25, that there's a kind of myth that if you're not in the top 100, you're not making anything. And the data doesn't actually show that. You can be in the top 1,000 and still make money, but the key is retaining your users. If you can retain your users and you have the monetization posts that you can tweak, you can make money. If you can retain your users and you can measure your that retention and monetization, then you can acquire users. But retaining users is key because that's how you need to survive for the long tail digital landscape. And so I kind of just felt like all of this was dancing around short tail versus long tail. When you're talking PvP, you're talking user-created content, you are talking about designing a long tail game.
I didn't see the comment, but I didn't see the question. So is this a comment? Or?
Yeah, actually,
Well, and long tail too, do you mean also just a much larger mass market than ordinarily embraces games, or
do you mean games as service, the long tail?
You can call it games as service, yeah. It doesn't necessarily have to be mass market, but you will see very small games that fit niche markets, and as long as they are able to retain and engage their players, they are going to make money.
See, at the end, everything is a function of your investment. Now, if you're 2 people sitting in mom's basement and you made a game which is really awesome, and you're in the top 1,000, let's say 600 on the Apple Store, maybe that's enough and it fulfills your goals, the financial and creative goals. But if you're looking at bigger investments into this, and you don't, so I know some of the retention numbers on modes. So if you build a game and you can measure retention, and if your retention rate, 30-day retention rate, is not over 40%, you're failing. Your game's going to fail because your churn is going to be higher than people coming into the game. If your retention rate is 50% or higher, then you're going to have a self-sustaining game where you can tone down an acquisition and put more money in building new content for the audience. So these are metrics. Now,
here's a kind of a very theoretical question, but we'll say you had Sam and Dan Hauser here, and they were talking about making the next Grand Theft Auto, and you put them together with an analytics team. Like, what would happen in that conversation? what would they even talk about? I guess is a question. And should that actually happen, right? Or are they doing just fine without any knowledge of analytics whatsoever?
It is interesting. Teams are resource constrained. They only get a certain amount of money and a certain amount of time at EA and other places to make a game. Not looking at Ken Walton here. You would like to ensure that they're given enough resources and time to build up a team that make a game that, if successful, will continue for a long period of time. EA has many experiences of great success for long periods of time. Ultima Online, Dark Age of Camelot by Mythic. Other cases that were less clear, Star Wars: The Old Republic. But again, having a team think about 1, 2, 3 years out is often very challenging. You just simply don't know if that game will do well. You'd like to hope that they build in the hooks to add on more content or the aspect to continue the game on a go-forward basis here. You simply don't know. You simply have a limited window. I do agree that those games that have a curve that looks like this, fantastic, right? Riot games like this. Clash of Clans, absolutely. Candy Crush, absolutely. Other games we've seen do great for a while. They spike and then they naturally progress down. And again, if they can indeed retain that that portion of the core audience that continues to spend, that's a great way to go. That's a lower DAU, but higher monetization type of the game, the type that you'd see from some Command and Kickside type games. Right? Again, there's many different models for success.
Yeah, I think that I would say the long tail of success really comes from the long tail of development as well. If someone's going to walk up to me and say, look, I've developed a game, it's all done, and it's going to be successful from here on out with all the work we put into it, I wouldn't believe it at all. I mean, the intersection of play and consumers and observation and where they want to go next, and then providing additional features. None of the games you just mentioned are, have stopped from their day of launch. In fact, almost all of them are 50% or more changed from the day they launched originally. And if you aren't changing, you're doomed, I think, to that slow tapering off. So whether it's a small game with 2 people or a large game with hundreds of people, the ongoing development is what makes a difference. And the cost of that ongoing development then is what factors into your success or not. If we have 200 people continuing to work on some game for a long tail, we have to be significantly more successful than 5 people who are just in a startup situation.
I will, if I could, make one more observation. Spend time with a lot of different startups. Those who have folks who come out of the console gaming world and immediately go to a free-to-play game, many of them, most of them fail. The folks there are focused on jamming everything they can onto a disc. That's where they came out of that world. Put it on disc, ship it out to retail. Sure, maybe you'll get a patch or 2 out, maybe you'll get some downloadable content. But really, you've got a limited window of time to get users to buy a $60 disc with a certain amount of content fixed onto it. And those folks who then immediately transition to the free-to-play world often have a tough time. If they try once and fail, I'll back them for the next one because they've learned a lot of lessons at that point in time. But it's just one of those fundamental learnings that folks who come out of the console world have to adjust to.
Yeah, go ahead.
I would like to ask you to comment on the challenge, on technological challenges of going cross-platform. Because even if content is king, if you can't make the content work sort of natively and fluently on a tablet versus the console versus PC, then it probably won't do very well. Users will feel it's a subpar experience. So my company brings iOS games to Android, and we find that we deal with this every day. And I was wondering, from your perspective, what do you see? How large does that challenge move for you?
It's getting better. I mean, there are lots of middleware now to do that. There didn't used to be. There's some pretty good tools that will let you get there at least faster. And now there are options that you don't have to roll up yourself. I think it's kind of hard to do it really well because you want it to sort of be seamless. And I'm less concerned about going from iOS to Android than I was supporting games that run simultaneously on PC, iOS, Android, and you name the other platform. That's a lot harder, and it really requires you to either synchronize all your code bases and synchronize releases. There's a lot of and it's not just the technology, it's actually the content creation and release process gets really complex. But I think it's worthwhile because we kind of get all caught up in platforms as developers and publishers of games, but to consumers, and in particular dealing with younger kids, for them, they don't really care. Moving from one platform to another seems very natural to them. So if you can do it, they're not going to appreciate how hard it is, but they will like your game, and you'll get more time from them, and that's ultimately what you're going for.
And something you mentioned earlier, Dean, was that UBR framework that we have, and really having us putting that on a variety of platforms has helped games, from our standpoint, go easily across platforms. There's still design interface, challenges for each one, adapting to whether it be touch or controller. And I think the challenge from our side comes from making sure that the same features are available across platforms, and that essentially your progression, your save, will work from place to place, and you are really playing what feels like the same game. Let alone the complexity of you're trying to maintain a consistent connection between devices for any kind of cohesive, simultaneous play.
We've seen companies like Unity come up about who can take games from iOS to Android, or at least shorten the window by which you can take a game from one platform to the other. That aspect of cross-platform development, where a game runs on iOS or on Android or on PlayStation, there are tools that are coming out there. I would say, and I don't know if you come from App Portable, it's another company that obviously takes games from iOS to Android quite quickly. One of the leaders of EA who's going to speak at VentureBeat, Frank Gibeau, was on a town hall, and he said, based on our experiences with Simpson and Real Racing, EA is going to try and come up with day-and-date releases of games on iOS and Android. He was also quoted more recently as saying the reason why Apple sees Plants vs. Zombies and Android doesn't is they paid us a boatload of money. Well, paid EA a boatload of money. I don't think that's actually true. The point is, getting a game that works on different platforms, absolutely a worthy goal, only makes sense if the monetization is there. If the number of dollars you make on Apple to Android is 10 to 1 or 15 to 1 versus 3 to 1, which some folks are seeing now, then you're not going to develop for another platform. It doesn't make sense to. If you're seeing a closer gap in personalization, great. From a design of game standpoint, if I'm on iOS and I'm playing against Android user or playing against a Facebook user, there's a company out there I think about called Chronoblade, or Enway, and they make a game called Chronoblade. They're thinking of a game that plays across Apple device, Android device, and Facebook. Well, the connectivity on a PC versus wireless, touch versus a mouse control and keyboard control, very different. How do you make a game that's fair? How do you make, say, a Mortal Kombat type game if someone's playing on a tablet versus a phone versus a PC, and they're trying to get them all to play together? There's some design aspects that come into play here, and you need to think about that, and that's a very complicated proposition. So, cross-platform, where users can play across devices, across form features and command controls. I don't know if that is going to be done as well as simply there's a Simpsons version of iOS versus a Simpsons Android version versus or
The question is, shouldn't we be there? Like you guys all have cards for our conference, VentureBeat conference, on your chairs, and the theme is the battle royal. And the sort of assumption there is that the walls have come down between different pieces of the industry that sort of created artificial separations between markets, and lines between platforms. Going across platforms shouldn't be as hard as it used to be. Going into new territories shouldn't also be as hard as it used to be. And yet we have these strange sort of divisions still. Zynga has not succeeded in moving from Facebook to mobile as well as it should have. What state are we in? Why do these barriers still exist?
Well, I think, coming back to the first question, how hard is it to port? Technology will let you port. At some point, someone's going to build this really awesome tool, you can take a game, pass it through this grinder, and it can just pop on an Android game. Yes, it's going to happen. But if you didn't build that game to be cross-platform, if you did not start the design process by being cross-platform, then you're going to end up using the problem. The first content was built for Facebook. If you blindly take it and try to make it now for the mobiles, it's hard. Yes, you can do it technologically. Can you make it succeed is the question. But some of the stuff which they acquired, which was built for the mobile, was phenomenally successful. The Scrabble, the Words with Friends app, that was built for the mobile. Amazingly successful content. So you have to start with design, you have to get down to the basics and say, I'm going to create this piece of content. And if you answer your first, and if you say, I'm only making it for the iOS, and then one day I'm just going to, once it's successful, I'm just going to pop it out through this grinder, it's going to give me an Android app, or Xbox game, or PC game, I don't think you'll be successful.
The other thing to think about is, do these companies want to collaborate with each other, or are they competing? Does Microsoft and Sony and Google and Apple and Facebook, do they want to hold hands and sing Kumbaya? Is it in their best interest to do so? And so there's a little bit of that. There's actually parts of these different companies who would like to collaborate with each other, who would like to share permissions, they would like to work together. And there are other parts that say, this doesn't make sense. And as long as that ecosystem is there, I think it's going to be challenging to have a true cross-platform game.
Another question from the audience? Right here.
Something back to
Here in front.
So if you guys look at net revenue, Western markets on iOS and on Google, and then you look at EBIT margin for, say, 2013, and then what percent is spent on UA dollars and
So I've done this study at Reloaded. We never really had money. We were not startup. We never had money for acquisition. But I was trying to build a model for we were trying to raise money and we were trying to build this model. And I'd studied a lot of companies and what they were doing. So traditionally it was, for games as a service, I'm not retail. Games as a service, if you were launching a new product, you were essentially earmarking anywhere between 18 to 25% of your projected revenue towards user acquisition. It's not like a one-time campaign, it's an ongoing user acquisition process. And that would be kind of a good number to benchmark against, somewhere between 18 and 25. Now you don't want to be in 18 to 25 consistently over the 5-year life cycle. So if you need to spend 25% year on year on your user acquisition, then something's wrong because you want the game to become self-sustaining. You want to hit the 55%, 52% 30-day retention mark, so your game is virally generating enough traffic as well. So you want to see if your first year is at 20, 25%, 18%, and then roll it back down to 12 to 7 to 8 in year 2, year 3, somewhere on that time, then you're doing a fairly good job and your game's growing.
So the person asked question is Dan from Kabam here. Dan is with Zynga Corp Dev, so he's seen some of this as well. It was fun for me to see 2 years ago, 3 years ago, I even say some of last year, some leading mobile game companies who got to spend 40, 50% of every dollar on customer acquisition. And they basically weren't kind of, for lack of a better word, socking away some cash in the bank to invest on a bigger, more expensive, higher quality title. So they were spending everything they had to get on that charts. Well, frankly, at EA, we don't have that luxury. We do have to save some money as profits to invest in the next game. As you've seen the world evolve in mobile, the world gets to one of fewer, bigger, better. The demands for a game increase, the amount of money and time it takes to make a great game that will resonate with the audience for a long period of time increases logarithmically. And so many of these companies were not sustainable because they were basically taking all the cash and pumping into customer acquisition, but they weren't saving money for that next game. I think 3 years ago, I spent time with a company in Russia, a company called Zecto Labs. It's 2 brothers and a few outsourced developers. The cost to make Cut the Rope, the first Cut the Rope, was quite small. I don't think they could spend that little money today to make a hit game.
You just announced Cut the Rope 2 today. So here's an interesting fact to go with that comment, I guess. The Machine Zone spent, I think it was a year and a half, making Game of War with a team of 80 people. They built like a translation engine for the game. They built a messaging network underneath the game. And they built the game itself as well. And it's a mobile game. Is that the kind of investment that we can expect to see as sort of the AAA comes to mobile?
I think that's only going to happen when we've closed that gap, the value gap. It's just too risky right now. If you built a game, if that's your one shot and you're putting all that money in one game, you're buying a lot of equipment from it.
So the company there is run by a guy named Gabe Layden. He's a very passionate entrepreneur, one who articulates free to play very well. We used to see a lot of games from him, low quality, but quickly generated games. Original Gangsters, I remember, being one of those. And then he raised money from Menlo, and he went quiet for almost a year.
Yeah.
Really didn't see any new products. And then they released their newest game, and it did go up to the top of the charts. It was a more sophisticated, they invested a lot more time and effort and energy into it to make a hit game. Right? So
they're trying to out Kabam.
It is a statement. It is a statement that the cost to make a high-quality game that will rank highly in the charts in the long term is going up. There will be games that on occasion, similar to independent films, think about Blair Witch Project way back in the day. You spend a little bit of money and somehow you hit on something that resonates with the consumer and it hits and it does better than everything else out there. Otherwise, you are going to invest a lot of time, a lot of money, teams of 10, 20, 30 folks, make a great game, save up the money for customer acquisition on the front end, save up some money for continuing acquisition as the game goes live. Budgets are going to go up.
And we've seen the same thing, on our end. And when we first started doing some mobile games, it was a bit of experimentation, and a variety of our studios around the world, and then we got serious with Rayman and put the money into doing it with a good IP and a good title and work. It was, Game of the Year. But, there's plenty of others that were the lottery ticket approach or the learning approach. We've come to realize that at some level, making a game on a different platform is no different. You're going to invest in making a good game. You're going to invest in making it the right way for that particular platform. And at least with a structure like ours, that's not cheap.
We're good. I'd like to thank our panel for their wisdom and remind everybody to go to VentureBeat on October 29th and 30th.